What's up, everybody? It's Dan from Binder Boneyard coming at you from the office. It is end of January. It is cold. It snowed yesterday. It's like 5 degrees outside right now. But it's supposed to be back up in the 50s next week. So anyway, yeah. Thanks for listening in. I'm glad you're here. Like I said last week, trying to be more consistent. And then I'm going to not be consistent because I'm going to be out of town for like 9 days, and I probably won't be able to do any recording. I might try to record something on my phone, but it still won't get out to you guys until I get back, and Brad can edit it and put it out. So there may be a gap in the podcast. So sorry, but yeah, if I do something from King of the Hammers, because that's where I'm going, it might be interesting. I don't know. But speaking of King of the Hammers, if you're unfamiliar, that is a desert race in Southern California. It is started out as a rock crawling event, but with speed. So there's desert sections in between the rock trails, and it started out as a bunch of guys in rock crawlers doing these trails and trying to get from the next one to the next one, and then they figured out that they needed to be faster in the desert and then faster in the rocks, and it just kind of evolved into what Ultra 4 is today, which is $500,000 cars that go very, very fast and are extremely durable. The new models of Ultra 4 cars that are, IFS, solid axle rear, they're getting close to like trophy truck speeds in the desert now. And that's pretty incredible considering, 15 years ago, they were calling everyone in the sport rock donkeys because they were so slow. And now it's coming around to where all the trophy trucks are all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive. And, you can't be competitive in desert racing if your truck's not all-wheel drive. So I just think that's kind of funny how it's come full circle. But anyways, I will be down there spectating. I'm not racing. I don't have that kind of budget or time, but it is my one true vacation that I get to take every year where I'm not selling parts or whatever. I am going to be looking at some stuff while I'm down there, but I don't have, I'm not selling, I'm not doing businessy stuff. So my one real vacation. So anyway, I will be down there. But yeah, if you follow on the socials, you will see lots of pictures and stuff. The signal service down there is pretty bad when it really starts getting full of people. But, I'll do my best to update now and then. Which then leads me into the next segue, which is I've been working on my Scout to get ready for this trip, just so I have something to get around in. And then the guys have been working on it too, in between customer work. So that brings me to today's podcast, which we're going to talk about welding. I know I've done a couple of pods on welding and fabrication before, but it's always good to circle back to all the new people that have been listening and want to learn about welding and fabrication. So I know that it is intimidating if you're not familiar with the process, because of the equipment needed, the skills you think you need, the process, just all of it. So if you have the space, if you have a garage or place to work, generally you can do welding and fabrication. The thing is, don't get hung up on the fact that you need a $4,000, Miller-Matic 250. Like you don't need that sort of stuff. You can do 95% of fabrication with a 110 powered welder. Like we have 2 wire feed welders in the shop here. I've got my big Miller 200 that we run 030 wire in it, and we use it for all the regular heavy fab, thick stuff, and sheet metal jobs too. That's why I run 030, because it kind of can go back and forth between the two. And then we also have a small Lincoln 140, which is a 110 powered wire feed that we run 025 wire in. And we use that for a lot of the sheet metal body work. And it does do some, heavier work as well. Like you can do 3/16 in a single pass with it if you know what you're doing. So that's what I would recommend for new guys starting out is, a little Lincoln 140 or the Miller, the equivalent in the Miller. There are these other brands out there. The Eastwood sells one, and, these Amazon Chinese brands that sell wire feed welders. I don't know. I feel like if you're going to take the step into doing your own metal fab, that you should buy something a little more name brand. Just, the same thing. If you're going to be a professional mechanic, don't buy all of your screwdrivers at Harbor Freight. You're going to want some legit actual name brand tools. So same goes with the metal fab welding stuff. Like I have a lot of faith in the name brand stuff. If you're trying to save a few dollars but still want name brand, you can buy that Lincoln 140 at Home Depot. I think the Home Depot version's like $800. My version that I bought from the welding supply store was $1,100. Supposedly there's some differences internally. I don't know. I think maybe that's just the welding shop trying to justify their pricing. But either way, or keep an eye on Marketplace or Craigslist. You can see there's guys selling welders there occasionally. And so then that brings me into the next thing is don't use flux core wire. A lot of these small welders, they come with flux core wire, and so you can weld without gas. That's good for welding outside in the wind or, dirty material or whatever. But it is a ugly, not very nice looking weld, and sometimes not that strong, especially if you're just starting out. Your weld quality is probably not going to be great. So, I recommend you spend a few dollars, get a gas bottle, and, run solid wire. And, especially in the small machine, like an 025 is a great wire for a small 110 powered welder. You could go 030. I wouldn't go 035. That's big wire for such a small machine. They say you can run it, but 025 is kind of a good all-around novice homeowner wire size. So, and some places might sell it as like 023, and in that range, the 023, 025. But, I would look into that, maybe even as your first welding project, build yourself a cart. Home Depot, Lowe's, they sell casters, they sell wheels loose for $4 or $5 a piece. And, you can go to the steel place and you buy yourself a couple feet of, 095 square tube, and you can build yourself a little cart for your welder and your gas bottle, because you don't want your gas bottle tipping over. That's very dangerous. It'll break if it breaks the regulator off the top. They don't explode. Contrary to popular belief, these bottles don't explode. The top will break off, and then they turn into torpedoes, and they will go through several brick walls and your refrigerator, but they don't explode. So you don't want them tipping over, because you don't want to risk breaking off that regulator or the end and then have it turn into a spinning ground flower. So you need a cart with a chain or something to keep the bottle from tipping over, but yet still maneuverable. So like I said, that might be a good welding project. There's tons of ideas and stuff like that on YouTube and various places that have plans and DIY stuff. And that brings me to another piece of equipment that you really need to have when you're getting into your welding journey, is a grinder. You really need a grinder, 4.5 inch angle grinder. We really like DeWalt's. I've worked in a lot of shops that have had a lot of different grinders. If money's no object, you get the Metabo made in Germany. Those are amazing, but they're like $250 a piece. The nice paddle switch DeWalt's are like $90 a piece and are very good. I've had a few of the $12 Harbor Freight ones that don't last past turning them on. I do know other guys that have had them and they've lasted for 5 years. So it's a real crapshoot with the cheap Harbor Freight ones. But again, if you're gonna stick with this journey and see yourself needing it in the future for not just working on your Scout or your International, but home projects, building a railing, or anything like that, it might not hurt to invest a few dollars in good stuff now. Because a good grinder, because you can run a grinding wheel, of course, flap disc, those are my favorite, or cut off wheels. There's even attachments for like polishing and softer metal removal. One grinder can do a lot of work. So, I would recommend you consider, buying something that is not just, middle of the road at best, but the better you can afford, the better. Because when you're doing these welding projects, if you're doing quarter panel replacements or anything like that, you're going to have to grind certain parts to clean off paint and rust and debris so that your new metal can be joined to your old metal. Because that is one of the most important parts of welding with wire feed welder with solid wire, is that the cleaner the material that you're welding on or welding to, the better. Your weld quality, you can be a not great welder, your technique can be not good, but if your material is super clean and your fit up is nice, that goes a long ways. Because the other way, if you're an excellent welder and your technique is good and you know all the systems, but you're trying to weld two pieces of rusty, gross, tar-covered dirt, pieces together, they're not going to stick. Not very well anyways. And it's not going to look that good. So, just like everything in life, especially automotively, prep and setup is key. That trumps experience a lot of times. Just knowing how to have good prep, good setup, it just goes so far into having a good quality weld. So, I would recommend getting some scrap material. If there is a scrap yard near you that has, that lets you buy stuff out of there, usually they sell it by the pound. I would go in there and I would just find some scrap material, like quite a bit, because you go through it a lot faster than you think when you're practicing. But I would get some material and clean it up, clean your weld surfaces, and just practice. Just figure out your settings. If it's thin gauge sheet metal, 18, 19, 20 gauge sheet metal, then you're going to need to learn what a low setting and wire speed will do. And then, if you're welding 1/8 inch plate for doing something heavier, what setting that takes. And maybe even get a little, Post-it or a piece of paper or masking tape, stick it to the welder with some baseline settings, like wherever your dials or whatever they need to be. Just say, hey, thin material, it needs to be this voltage and this wire speed. And, 1/8 inch middle material needs to be this and this. And then heavy, like 1/4 inch, needs to be this. And a lot of these small 110 powered wire feeds will tell you that, 3/16 is their limit with hardwire. You can do 1/4 with good prep and, maybe even multiple passes. But yeah, you can generally get outside the range of what they consider acceptable. At least I have. And you'll learn what you can get away with the more you do it. So I would recommend, taking notes, keeping track until you become more comfortable with what you're looking at when you're working. So that's where, like I said, you're going to want a grinder. The next thing, because safety third, you're going to want some good safety gear, decent gloves. I have 2 different pairs. I have a heavy set for when I'm doing thicker work, because when you crank the amperage up on your machine, of course, it's going to make more heat, more power, so stuff gets hotter. So I have some thicker gloves for when I'm doing heavy work, and then I have thinner gloves for when I'm doing light work. It just is helpful for me. So, you're going to want some good gloves, and you're going to want to always wear long sleeves when you're doing this, and try to get dark. Don't wear white or gray, because it will actually reflect the light up under your hood, and it can flash your eyes just from the brightness of it reflecting off of your white clothes. So, blues, blacks, even reds, I think are okay. Just needs to be long sleeve, high collar, just something to cover you, because you will get sunburned badly if you don't cover up. And, it's the same kind of skin cancer you can get from being in the sun if you weld exposed too much. My forearms are permanently speckled from welding, short sleeves and stuff like that. So my tattoos that I have on my hands and arms are fading out because of all of the light exposure. So just keep that in mind as well. I know a lot of professionals, pipeliners, stuff like that, they'll put sunscreen on their neck and parts of them that are exposed, because that'll help. That will actually help block the UV. It won't completely, but sometimes every little bit helps if you're doing it all the time. And then a good hood, a good welding hood. And, in this one, you can get away with some of the lower brands or a fixed shade. You've probably seen, maybe you have, I don't know, the videos or where guys have their hood up, and then just before they go to start welding, they dip their head real fast, and then the hood falls down over their face, and then they start welding. That's a technique that you have to practice. But once you nail it, then, I know a lot of guys that stopped using an auto dark hood and went back to the head flip because the lens quality on a fixed shade is very good. Fixed shade hoods, that you can get lenses, number 10, number 11s that are very clear, and they, give off a good color, and it's really nice to see. The downside is that you have to be steady with your hands so that when you flip your head down, you don't move your hands and then start welding on something that you weren't supposed to weld on. So I still use an auto dark. I have a Miller Digital Elite that I bought, 10 years ago now. Still works good, got a big screen. The downside with the auto darks is that they're green. That everything, all the color, there is no color. It's just shaded green. Nowadays, some of the new brands, the Viking, Miller Viking, or the Optrails, or the Speed Glass, they have some different colors to see better. But those hoods are $300 to $500. I remember even my Digital Elite 10 years ago was $279, which I thought was crazy. But it's paid for itself now because of all the TIG welding. It's so hard to TIG with a flip down hood. I mean, I know pipeliners do it, and it's just another skill set that I haven't learned. But for me, it's just easier to auto dark, because then, when I'm under a car welding in the Scout or something like that, and I got to jam my head into a confined space, it's nice to put the hood down and then get into the space versus trying to get in there with your hood up, because you can't, it's super tight. So anyway, try to find a decent middle of the road hood. Again, if you're looking at doing this long term, like if you have a Scout that's super rusty and you have it in your mind that you're going to do all of the metal work, floor pans, bed, quarter panels, end cap, like all of that welding, I would really, really recommend you get the best hood you can afford. If you are just looking at like a few projects a year, weekend warrior, tacking a bracket onto your kid's bike or something, then you can probably get away with the Harbor Freight cheaper one. I know it's your eyesight, but that's up to you to decide how much it's worth to you. But I've used the cheap hoods in the past, and they have been okay. I haven't gotten flashed. Knock on wood, I've actually never had flash burn in all my years in the fab shops, doing all the heavy fab, because that's what I did before I worked on Scouts. In case you didn't know, my career was heavy fab. I built heavy equipment, worked in various fab shops all around the state, and doing everything from TIG welding aluminum to 052 dual shield on 3-inch thick plates with 30 or 40 passes. Like, it's just, I've done pretty much all that stuff. So, I kind of have some background in all this stuff. But yeah, I would just say, again, look at your intended work. If you think it's just a couple times a year and you've gotten, the cheap grinder and the base model welder, you can probably just, get an average hood. But if you got the, Miller-Matic 180 and you've got, a Metabo grinder, then you're probably going to want a decent hood, Miller Digital or the Lincoln Viking. But again, it's up to you, whatever your budget can afford and what you think you're going to be doing. But I will say that the better the stuff you get, the more enjoyable your experience will be. Because just like everything in life, if you cheap out, and it's never good. You buy cheap clothes and they fall apart after a few weeks or a couple of washings, you're going to be disappointed. Cheap shoes, cheap boots, whatever, you always end up paying more in the long run. But if you buy high quality stuff that has good reviews and good feedback, I guarantee you your experience is going to be much better. And I know people that have given up on some of this stuff because of poor experiences with their equipment or whatever they've purchased. So, yeah, I would just keep that in mind when you're out shopping for this stuff. But regardless, it is not a cheap date. you are looking at, $1,000 for a welder. You're looking at a couple $100 for a gas bottle. You're looking at, $100 for a grinder, 150 to 250 for a hood, wire brushes. It adds up. And so you have to decide, is the money I'm going to spend on those tools going to be worth it in the long run? If you're doing one job, if you have one scout and you're going to repair some panels and then that's it, it might be worth just farming that job out. But if you want to have some tooling that you're going to keep for a while that will serve you long term, then maybe consider it. And then some other tips from the haggard old guy that I can give you. Instead of having one really big gas bottle, because it never fails that you will run out of gas on a Sunday and no one will have it, is instead of having one big bottle, have two small bottles. That way, when you run out on your Sunday, you can change to your fresh bottle, as long as you remember to refill the empty one the last time. So, and then also your spools of wire. Most of the, if you buy wire from a big box store like Home Depot or Lowe's, they sell them in 2-pound spools. Your welder will come with a 2-pound spool of wire normally. I would go to the welding supply store and buy the 10-pound spool, because again, it's cheaper when you buy it like that and it lasts longer. But don't just buy one, buy two, or buy one and then save the 2-pound spool for your emergency when you run out on a Sunday. And then what I do is that, around here, the small machine runs a 10 and the big machine runs a 30-pound. And I just always have an extra spool of each, always, just because it never fails. You run out on a weekend or whatever. But if I were, homeowner, small welder, I would have the 10-pound and I would save the 2-pound. And then when I ran out, I'd put the 2-pound in, finish my job, and then during the week, buy another 10-pounder and take the 2-pounder out, put it back on the shelf, put the 10-pounder in and run that. And then I would just use that 2-pounder as my emergency backup until that was gone. And then just start buying 2 10-pounders, always have a 10-pounder on the shelf. It never fails. You're going to want a package of consumables, the tips. You're going to have, you will go through tips. And, I would have a package of like 10, just because when you're first starting out, you will stick wire to the tips and ruin them. That's just what happens when you're learning your settings and your stuff. So make sure you have lots of tips on hand, a nice pair of side cutters, or even whelpers. If you want to buy the actual tool, get yourself some whelpers. They're very good to have. And what else? Safety glasses for when you're running the grinder. Just nice to have some safety glasses. Some earplugs, because that stuff can get loud, or you're banging on steel or whatever. Put some earplugs in. Some breathing. You can't have a lot of wind blowing around when you're using wire feed with gas, because it'll blow your gas away and make your weld crappy. So you got to weld indoors or shielded, and that can expose you to smoke and or fumes. If you really want to go for a respirator, you can. Miller makes a small one that it is tight to your face, but so you can still put your hood down and not have clearance problems. Use that. That's with a word of caution. If you have respiratory problems and you put a respirator on, you may pass out. Respirators are not just fancy dust masks. They can actually limit your airflow and create other health problems. So I am not telling you to get one. There's not medical advice. Do not die, but think about some sort of breathing. Even if you do just use a dust mask, if you are concerned about the dust and fumes from welding, you can look into that as well. But anyway, hopefully that was semi-informative. You learned something. Probably have more questions. I don't know. But if you do, you can always reach out through the socials. Let me know if you have any other questions, concerns, and I'll do my best to answer them. I appreciate you guys listening. You can donate on Patreon. You can subscribe on Instagram. Every dollar helps. I appreciate it very much. I love you all. Until next time, Dan from Binder Boneyard.